a leader reached out to me and they were like, my team keeps reporting they're burnt out. What resources exist? And I said, well, actually, as a leader, you have so much opportunity to really help with their burnout. She was like, I'm their leader. I have nothing to do with burnout. And I was like, many growth opportunities here.
You just told on
So,
yourself.
yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, let's start there.
Welcome to Mental Stillness. My name is Derek, and I'm excited that somehow you stumbled across this podcast. One of my goals when starting this podcast was to bring mental health conversations into leadership circles.
Well, welcome to another episode of Mental Stillness. And as always, I get to the privilege of speaking with very interesting people doing a lot of interesting work. And so today is no different with Dr. Vinatieri. And so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so why don't you share with the audience a little bit about the work that you do and your background?
So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I've been doing this work in therapy, specifically in treating PTSD for almost 2 decades. And in that experience and in doing management for various programs and teams, I started to experience my own burnout. And that led me to some exploration around, what is burnout? How do we address it? And I reached out to a mentor and asked him first, did he know of any jobs that were coming up? Because I was in a place where I knew I couldn't continue doing what I was doing. It was just really impacting my quality of life. And then also asked him, what resources exist for my own burnout, but also of my team. It was a mental health team treating PTSD during COVID, which we know burnout skyrocketed during COVID. And he shared with me about this new position that was coming called the Chief Wellbeing Officer. And so he said, yes, I can give you resources, but I really think you should explore this position and applying for it. And I did. So I've been doing this work for 3 years now. And the work really focuses on helping understand what drives burnout, really at the institution or organizational level, and what it looks like and where hotspots might be in different organizations, and then how to address it effectively. And that's really what I do. So I work full time for a large healthcare system where I'm their chief wellbeing officer. And then I have a business where I'm kind of a chief wellbeing officer for hire, so to speak, where I work with leaders around putting into place strategies and cultural shifts that can help address burnout in their staff.
Well, no, we're definitely going to spend time on the topic of burnout, and that's really what I think led us to intersect a bit. Is just I see it all the time in my leadership work as well, and on the clinical side, the non-clinical side, it's kind of the gift that keeps giving in all the different places, and it really is cross-cultural. It's industry-wide. I mean, it's very it's a big deal, and some even would prescribe it as an epidemic. And so, knowing what you know, and your personal experience and your professional experience, would you say that burnout is really an epidemic?
It really is. It's the rates of burnout that people experience are, anywhere depending on the industry as high as 65%, that's pretty high. It's been recognized by the World Health Organization as a global epidemic. It's been recognized by a previous Surgeon General in the US as an epidemic. So it's definitely truly something that's affecting various industries. And I think I want to maybe back up a bit and just define what burnout is, because I will say it is an overused term, and there's actually movements to change it to kind of what suboptimal work environments and things like that, because burnout in some ways can maybe be stigmatizing and send the message that if someone is burnt out because of things that they're doing versus kind of the workplace environment that they're in. So burnout is the result of excessive stress, high stakes environments, and oftentimes when there's some type of connective labor or emotional labor where you're working with other humans, that's where we see the highest rates of burnout in those kind of industries. That's not to say burnout can't exist in other industries, but that's where we're seeing the highest rates. There are three very specific symptoms that are indicators of burnout. The first is just exhaustion, physical, emotional, cognitive exhaustion that doesn't seem to abate when you take breaks, when you rest. It's kind of like Friday night, you're like, I'm just going to rest this weekend. I'm going to binge Netflix. I'm going to take it easy. But Monday comes and you're like, I did all those things. I didn't lift a finger and I'm still just drained emotionally, physically, and cognitively. So it's that really chronic fatigue that people experience that doesn't seem to get better with rest. The second is what we call depersonalization, where people start to feel callous towards other humans, where, especially if you're in an industry where you're working with other humans, you start to see humans as maybe just another meeting you have to get through or another appointment you have to do. And so there isn't necessarily that level of drive to connect with other humans that we see that oftentimes pull people to these different industries. And so people can start to feel callous towards human and kind of apathetic, which can be very distressing to someone who came to a field because, again, they really want to work and help with people. And then the third is feeling this sense of loss of mastery or effectiveness where people start to say, I don't even think I'm making a difference. I show up to work, I do my work, and I don't even know if it's helping any. So there's this decreased self mastery or this sense of like, I'm not really making an impact in the work I'm doing. So those are three kind of hallmark symptoms of burnout. And it's often preceded by chronic stress that people experience in the workplace, but once it turns to burnout, we get into this space where it's it's not going to be fixed by taking time off or shifting your schedule a little bit. Like it's a much bigger thing. And it's in most part driven by organizational factors, not personal weaknesses or lack of resilience.
And that's what I want to dive into because I think for many people who, maybe they're newer in their career and out of the gate they're excited, they're really loving the role. Maybe they had a manager that shifted, or I don't know, just all jobs change over time. There's just different variables and different factors, and so, I'm kind of that. I think that's who's on my heart with this question is like that new leader who's about to enter, or maybe they are entering burnout for the first time. Because I can reflect back on because I have a longer career, as do you, and you have seasons of burnout. But when it's someone first time facing it, in your experience as you're talking to people, I think a lot of people do take that personal, like something's broken in them versus the context in which I'm working is flawed. Or I'll get more specific. Maybe I have a bad manager because a lot of research even points to it. It's less about you at times. It's more about how you're led.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So leaders play a huge role in burnout, both in mitigating it and creating an environment where people can thrive, and the reverse, really potentially driving burnout through behaviors, through the cultural tone they set. So, absolutely. So, I would say if you are a leader and you're experiencing burnout for the first time, first of all, I want to validate and normalize that that happens, especially in leadership roles where you're getting pressure from above and also being the person that your staff come to have concerns and questions about things that you don't necessarily have the power to change. So I would say being a leader in the best of times is hard, and especially right now with just so many changes across industries. And so I would first normalize and not beat yourself up, have some self compassion, and think about what are the things that you're finding during your day that are making a good day versus a bad day. And those are probably the things that are driving your burnout. And that's where there are spaces to have conversations with people who make changes. And it may be maybe some behaviors you're engaging in where you're saying yes to everything and you're noticing that you just have too much on your plate now. And again, that's not to blame someone for having burnout, but looking at the system, looking at the organization and saying, this is one that'll keep giving you until you say no. Versus kind of checking in and saying, we're giving you something else. Is there something else we can take off your plate? So I think that introspection around what is it that may be driving my burnout is really important. And then reflecting on how, as a leader, that may get reenacted in your own behaviors that may then drive your staff's burnout. Like, is your boss leaving late every day at 7 PM or working on the weekends, and now you're doing that because you think that that's the
Yeah,
expectation
that's the
for your
cultural norm,
organizations?
right?
It's a cultural norm, yeah. And so your staff see that, and then they start to think like, "Is that the expectation for me? Am I going to be seen as lazy or not a committed employee if I'm not doing those things as well?" Even if you're saying, "I don't expect that," like, we're sending that implicit
And the
message,
number
yeah.
of times I've seen that weaponized with my clients as far as that kind of, I'm gonna call it overwork, is a badge of honor, and it's also weaponized when it's not happening. If that is the leader's norm and they're sending an email and it's going out at 9:47 PM at night, and it's like, "Oh, that's the expectation," or that is a quality or an attribute of leadership in this organization. I wanna get promoted, I wanna make more money, I wanna have more influence, like, I guess I'll just do that, and it gets over time, gets normalized, and it is like and I love how you said in there, we didn't use this word, but to me, like, if I'm actively trying to make some decisions uh, to reverse the burnout or to change that, like, it sounds like boundaries are a really important step for people to as a step to at least explore as far as on their own side of things. So how do you see boundaries and burnout, connected?
Very intimately connected. I talk a lot with leaders and frontline staff around strategic no's. Like, really knowing 2 things. The first is knowing your limits, not just in times of your time capacity, but your energy capacity. But secondly, knowing what your professional values are. Now, if you're in a position where you're like, "This is my job description, this is what is expected of me to do every day," there may not be a ton of flexibility, but as leaders, I think we do ourselves a service when we have a value or a mission for ourselves, and that's our guiding North Star. So that when people come to us and say, "We really want you to do X, Y, and Z," you can think about, is that in line with my North Star? Is that in line with my professional values? And really just taking advantage of those strategic no's. And that is really hard for high performers who really want to demonstrate their commitment. And I think what we sometimes miss is the level of respect that people start to develop for others when they say a strategic no, like, that's not something I can do at this time. I'm working on some other projects that have to get finished, but I know someone who might be a great fit. Or are there other ways I can help you with this that may be different than what you're asking of me? So I think what people start to learn about people who are willing to give those strategic no's and set those boundaries is like, this is someone I can respect who's, if they're always saying no, that's a different story, but
There's
you
boundaries on
get
your
to know.
boundaries, right?
Exactly, exactly. Like, if it's within your scope and it's what they've hired you to do, right? But again, I think people really then come to learn to trust that if you truly can do something, you will say yes versus I'm going to agree to do it, and then it becomes something that I can't really give my attention and time to create something that's a quality product, or I come back to you and I'm like, I know I said I could do it and I can't. So I think it actually builds trust when people are able to say, this is something I can do or something I can't, or can we reevaluate in 3 weeks or whatever it looks like.
The ability to overcome burnout or navigate through it, it seems like there needs to be a leader in a position that's willing to have a discussion around it and not just say, "Do better," or, like, "Do your job," like, the I would imagine, and this is at least my experience, but in your research and your experience, I'd love to hear that as well, like, when an organization recognizes that, "Hey, we have improvements that we can make as well," like, first of all, that's a humbling statement and a humbling approach, and I think would say a lot about a culture, and does say a lot about a culture when they can do that. But to get a leader that's on board with helping you figure it out, that's also about setting you up for success and not just about you being more resilient or taking a vacation and you come back and all the problems are still there. It's like that didn't fix the burnout. But I guess speaking to when you've seen an organization lean into it and try to set people up for success, um, how does that play out?
That is, I would say, the biggest barrier I face in my work is working with leaders who might not have that insight or might not be in that space to be willing to admit that the organization and maybe even their leadership behaviors are what are in big part driving burnout. So that's usually where I start by giving feedback around what I'm hearing from staff, what they're sharing. But when organizational leaders recognize that, then things shift. When people come to work and they really feel like the organization they work for or the company they work for and its leaders are truly invested in their employees, people show up, they're more productive, they're more engaged, they stay. And so, really, there's both a moral argument for addressing burnout, but also a fiscal argument. When people stay, when people are engaged, when people are more productive, everybody wins, regardless of
That's your sales
industry.
pitch right there.
Everybody wins. Yeah, yeah, burnout, and I think organizations get it that burnout is costly. And I think that we're slowly coming out of this mindset of, well, if we throw wellness programs or if we give people paid time off, that will be the fix. Because again, I think we're stuck in this mindset of burnout is something that, yes, we experience at an individual level. Like burnout is an occupational syndrome we experience at an individual level, but all of the factors that drive it are by the organization. So, and personal resilience fits in there, but there's really strong research that personal resilience serves as a mitigating effect for burnout when it's supported by the culture of the organization. So if you're telling people just do yoga on the weekends, that's not supporting well-being in the in the organization and your staff. And so resilience is like trying to, put out a fire with a garden hose type of thing. So again, when leaders really show an investment, not just performatively, but actually through their actions, through it can be pretty small things. But I always think about this when I'm talking with leaders. We all know the phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day. But the second part of that quote is what's most important. But they were laying bricks every hour. And as leaders and organizations, that's what we have to be doing is consistently putting in time and energy and commitment to making changes in the culture and in the organization to create a culture of well-being that demonstrates to employees we value them and we value their well-being and our own well-being. And so it can be smaller shifts like sh- in my organization, we've moved to this, we call it Operation Exhale because it's the VA and it's military. So operation is the key term there. But what it is when there's a 30-minute meeting, they end at 25 minutes so that there's 5 minutes for people to stretch, take a bio break, refill their coffee, maybe physically move to another meeting. And if it's an hour-long meeting, it wraps up 50 minutes instead of at the hour so that people actually have that time. And that is a shift that really can have a huge impact for people when the cultural norm is we end traditionally 30-minute meetings at 25 minutes or 60-minute meetings at 50 minutes. Or having leaders that say, I'm going to be off, I'm going to be unplugged. The people that need to get a hold of me have my personal cell phone, but I will not be checking email. Just things like that. So again, those are those kind of bricks you're laying every day to work towards that cultural transformation, which is really the requirement of addressing burnout is like you have to change the culture. Nothing else is going to get that work done. And who sets the culture? The leaders do. So that's where that leadership behavior comes in.
Well, Dr. Vinatieri, I love the Rome reference with the Italian name, so there you go, right?
Very fitting.
Very fitting. Uh, it is interesting because I know you're uh, in the healthcare space, and you know, for a season when I served at oversaw a mental health clinic here in Kentucky, and we had a couple different locations and a lot of different providers that would come in. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how how much our providers benefited from the environment in which they could do what they went into the profession to do. And so time and time again, and we were a free clinic, so um, we had some things that we didn't have to do, like deal with insurance is a big one that I get it. Like we had something, it's not a apples to apples comparison with a bigger healthcare system that's not set up like a free clinic, but at the same um, time and time again, the feedback from providers is like, oh, I love serving here. I love being on the team here because it really does allow me to be with patients, which is what people want to do as providers and why they go through all the years and years of training and to be with patients and truly make a difference and not have all the other barriers that get in the way of that. And so I think of this from a standpoint of how life-giving and cathartic and freeing and even productivity and results, all those positive outcomes of when an organization really does try to set up the team for success, like it helps everybody all the way to the patient, let alone retention of providers. And so it just always really it was time and time again the feedback. And so I'm curious because I know you have a healthcare background and probably not within the free clinic space, but what what would you where does your experience overlap with how I've defined that as far as provider retention and providers? Because burnout at at the physician level, the provider level is extremely high. And so yeah, speak into that. What comes to mind?
Sure. Yeah, and that's what led me on this journey was my own burnout, not just as a manager, but also as a clinician. And what you're speaking to around people just showing up wanting to do the work of having that human connection is so important, and that's what fulfills people. I was talking with a colleague one day, and she said, "When I'm feeling really burnt out from my duties as an assistant chief, I go and spend time with my patients. Like, that is what fills my cup." And in many industries, healthcare being a big one, behavioral health, mental health being big ones as well, there's so many regulations and so many administrative demands on our time that that's oftentimes what takes people away from the work that they want to do, and we're noticing that that's where people are like, I just wanna come to work, see my patients, get my documentation done, and go home, but it's never that easy because there's all these additional demands on their time, and when there's a lack of flexibility around how people practice, that is a huge driver to burnout, and we're seeing that more and more because, again, a lot of these fields are highly regulated for good reason, but sometimes it gets to the point where we've tipped into rigidity where we're like, "Okay, substance abuse program, you have 30 days to get this person to a place where they're solidly in their recovery." Now, I've done substance abuse
Yeah.
treatment, you may have it in your
Yeah, oh, yeah,
background
and we
too.
need you to diagnose after the intake session. Yeah, get the
Yes, exactly. Yeah, get all the information in that 60 or 90 minutes where you can, like, 100% say with, total certitude. So, yeah, it's those kind of things where people don't have the flexibility around practicing in a way where they're like, "This is good treatment that I'm delivering. The quality of treatment I am delivering matches my own standards." So moral distress is a separate phenomenon from burnout, but it's a driver of burnout. When people feel morally distressed and they're like, "I don't feel like the care I'm delivering is to my standard. I don't think it's benefiting the patient." I think about primary care providers or like um, family physicians who are like, "I have 15 minutes to see each patient." And it's really hard if someone's waited 6 months and they have this laundry list to get through that and feel like I'm actually helping them. And so that's a big piece of where I think, again, these industries can really step back and say, how do we give clinical decision making back to the people who are experts in this, who have done lots of training and schooling to get where they're at? And how can we maybe delegate some of those administrative tasks to people who have been trained to do specifically those things? And so I want to put a plug for a book written by Dr. Allison Pugh. It's called The Last Human Job, and it's about how AI is here to stay likely and how there's kind of this potential threat that AI will take away some of the aspects of the work that we do in these industries that really fulfill people. And so, doing therapy with a chatbot versus sitting down with someone versus can we get AI to do the documentation and then have it reviewed by the provider, of course, for their stamp of approval. But can we use AI to do those things that are maybe mundane and are important or necessary or required, but allow people to spend more time doing what they love to do because that will be the ticket to retention and productivity and engagement. So, yeah, I think having that flexibility is so important.
Yeah, I love that you went there because I do feel like that's there's so much, conversation happening in the space and from a ethical, moral, standpoint of, specifically the mental health world and AI. And here's an interesting thing. So I'm kinda going back to, the manager perspective. Last I heard, and you may have some updated data on this, but, I think it's around, this is a little bit on, like, meaning and purpose of people thriving in their role, and, I think it's 20% of people's work, if it can be in aligned with their purpose and their meaning, like, they're engaged and they're I don't wanna say they're content, but they're more engaged in their role if and so I'm looking at that from a practical standpoint of, like, if I'm leading a team of people, like, I need to be fighting to help them figure out what that 20% is and helping drive the boundary conversation. How do we make sure that 20% is present for you? And I know that may be, nuanced based on roles and various things, but I don't know, like, where does your mind go, or what would you add to that 20%? And maybe that number's a bit off, but I mean, I remember seeing that some time ago and thinking, "Wow, that's pretty interesting." That drives engagement levels up.
Yeah, that's the number I've seen too from the burnout research is that just 20%, which is not we're not asking for 80% of, allowing people to say what they want to do, but absolutely. So having those conversations with staff around again, what makes a good day for you? What are the things that when you do them at work, you get lost in the mix of what you're doing because you're enjoying it so much? And that's different for everybody. And then how can I know that about my team so I can leverage strengths, so I can leverage interests, so that people are really doing at least that 20% of the work that they really enjoy doing? And absolutely, people will stay in a job where they may be like, this stuff, there's a ton of stuff I hate doing, but I get to do this, and when I do it, it just lights me up. I really enjoy it. So and the people who know that are your staff, and so that's where those conversations around again, what do you really enjoy? What do you find gets you into flow state? What drew you to this job? And then the flip side of that too is and what are the things that you find really tap your energy? So the things that we don't enjoy doing or we find stressful are the things that we're going to find really draining to do or the things we may avoid doing. Now, all of us are going to have things in our job that fall into that category. It's kinda a necessary evil of capitalism or whatever it is, I don't know, but there may be things that people are doing that could be assigned to somebody who does enjoy doing that. So, I am someone who does a lot of trainings, a lot of coaching, a lot of presentations, and I find that work is both energizing, but at the end of the day, I'm like, "That's taxing." Like, if I do 3 trainings in a day with a group, like 3 separate groups, by the end of the day, I'm like, "I need to rest tonight." But I have colleagues that they're like, "I love getting in front of people. It gives me energy. It just I love it." So can I work with that person to say, "Hey, we have a presentation coming up. I like working in the background too and being kinda like the party planner versus the host of the party. So if I co-create some PowerPoints with you, will you do the presentation?" Like, how can we have synergistic relationships like that in the workplace? And the answers are there if you talk to your staff and really, again, leverage those interests and those things that stress people out. And I would say that that's the same for managers. I think that's where managers and people in different leadership roles should be asking themselves, what is it that drew me to this leadership position? Why was I interested in it? Now, some of us were told you'd be a really good leader, and we kind of get pressured into taking it on, and we get in the job and we're like, this is not for me. But many leaders are like, I want to be a leader because I love helping develop people. Like, I love helping people grow professionally. So, knowing that and doing what you can to really stake claim and protect your ability to do that when you're working with your staff. And it may be something else, but finding what that is for you so that you're also kind of job crafting for yourself as well.
I think when we're talking about burnout and addressing burnout, something we really haven't spoken too much about yet, but is a key ingredient, there has to be psychological safety in to be at a spot where you can say to my leader, someone who, has direct influence, whether I'm employed or not, typically, for me to say, "Hey, this is the part of the job that I love, and this is the part that I don't love." Like, there has to be some trust and some psychological safety to say that. So where does psychological safety play a role from your experience?
Yeah, it's really the foundation of a lot of these conversations, which goes back to what I was saying earlier, where the greatest asset or barrier to doing this work and to creating cultural shift is leadership insights and behaviors and emotional intelligence. And so yeah, if you don't have psychological safety with your leadership, it's really hard to have those conversations. I will say that, and we know that when people don't have psychological safety when they with their immediate work group or even within their organization, they leave because it makes for a very adverse workplace experience, to not feel psychologically safe. So that's a really big part of it as well. And I've done some coaching with staff who don't feel the greatest level of psychological safety with their managers and had conversations around, can you pitch some of these ideas in a way that is maybe like a what's in it for you? Like, hey boss, this is what's in it for you if you allow me to do more of this. Now, I think that's a band-aid solution. I think the bigger problem there is we need to help leaders develop psychological safety, and a huge piece of that is looking at one's own behavior and saying, what am I doing? Like, I may say, "Hey, you're psychologically safe with me," but it's like if I told you, "Derek, you can trust me completely with your car." You'd be like, "I don't know your credentials. I've never seen proof that you can fix an engine. I'm not letting you anywhere near my car." So we can't just say you have psychological safety with me. We really have to engage in behaviors. And so that's a big part of the work I do too, is I coach leaders around like your actions are what are going to build psychological safety or deteriorate it. So that's a huge piece of all of this.
I love what you said earlier, backing up several, um, I guess topics ago, but just around, the 30-minute meeting, we're ending 5 early, and then we're gonna lean into this to give space for Operation Exhale, right? Being able to look at from a leadership standpoint, I'm managing people to be able to look and say, "Hey, what are we already doing where I can make sure that I help keep psychological safety top of mind or people's well-being top of mind?" And we got standing meeting on Wednesdays, so I can do it every Wednesday versus a more transactional, ineffective approach of, "Hey, once a year, we're gonna go. We're gonna have a well-being seminar, well-being training, and then boom, check for the year, move on." It's like versus the impact of those more consistent rhythms. I would imagine that being way more, um, having higher efficacy.
For sure. Yeah, because what it's doing is it's actually implementing things that are having an impact. If people are like, "Oh, I now know that every meeting we have, I'm gonna have a few minutes between to use the bathroom."
Yeah, a big deal,
It's just
right?
simple things. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Or refill my coffee or whatever it is. But yeah, the other thing that is important about having that cadence that's more regular is it truly demonstrates, I am committed to your well-being and the well-being of people in this organization versus we're checking the box. You know, I've had leaders tell me, "Well, we have employee assistance program if people are struggling." I'm like, "But that's kind of putting a Band-Aid on
Yeah,
an
and
arterial
look into
wound."
the
Like,
percentage of use of that EAP program, and you'd
yes,
be
yes. Yeah, in big part, when I remind people about EAP, because EAPs oftentimes have a lot of really awesome resources like financial counseling, legal counseling, housing assistance. Like, people don't know these things. What people think is, my boss thinks that I have a mental health issue, so they're requesting I go to EAP. So there's a lot of stigma around EAP
which
and
again,
mental
back to
health, and
psychological safety of the workplace, right?
absolutely. So I feel like a big part of my work too is helping destigmatize using these resources. Like, we all have physical health that we need to attend to. We all have mental health we need to attend to. Mental health doesn't mean you have a disorder, and maybe you do. That's okay. But it means that you're experiencing things in your life that are making it challenging, and speaking to someone could be helpful. So like that's a big part of it too, is just destigmatizing burnout, helping people understand it's something you're experiencing at an individual level, but it's not the fault of your own. And, engaging in these resources doesn't mean you're weak. It actually means like you're taking care of yourself and you're making yourself a more robust human.
I would love to I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit with I know, I'm sure, as mine, a lot of your training, a lot of case studies, right? When you're thinking about, how people change, how to help people, how to work alongside people. So kind of a scenario here. So somebody we have a list, let's say we have a listener, I'm sure we do, that is in a spot and maybe they would say, "Okay, I don't know the level of I'm not able to answer how psychologically safe my organization is. Definitely feeling burnout. Um, don't really have that connection with my leader, never have had it. What do I do as a next step?"
Yeah. Yeah. I bet there are a lot of listeners that are having those thoughts right now. So it's a good question. And I think it depends on a lot of different factors. But I think the first is, again, kind of doing a self assessment around what's driving my burnout. What are those factors? Are they things that may have the capacity to change it, or do I work in an organization that has stated very clearly, we expect you to work 60 hours? This is the work culture. Your relationship with your leaders are going to be very transactional, where I'm the boss, I tell you what to do. Or is it's an organization that's working on things, or there's space to have those conversations? So I always encourage, whether it's frontline staff or leaders, to make use of things like, do your leaders have town halls? Do they do leader rounding? Do they give opportunities for like employee surveys, and really giving that feedback if you feel like you can't have those candid conversations with your leadership around what's working and what's not. Um, so I feel like so much of this is really about bringing these conversations to the fore. And, part of it may be how we language it. So there are times when leaders will come to me and they're like, my staff are saying they're not psychologically safe with me, and they'll kind of roll their eyes. And so, sometimes it's about how we language it. Like, I'm finding it's hard for me to come to work and be productive when I'm feeling like I can't necessarily collaborate with people, or I don't feel like I can always come to you with concerns I have because I'm, nervous that rather than collaboratively figuring it out, I'm going to be told I've done something wrong. So I think I would just do some self-assessment around what are the factors that are leading to it. Are they things that have the capacity to change through conversations, through giving feedback? And I am someone who am a strong supporter of, if you're in an organization and that's just not the culture, and it's very clear that employees are treated as kind of cogs in a larger machine, then that might not be the place you want to spend your time and energy. And there are organizations that are very transparent. They're like, look, this is what we're expecting of you. We have laundry facilities and sleeping rooms and, a bunch of restaurants on campus because we expect you to live here. So I think those are some things, but also having those conversations, which take a lot of vulnerability. And it's really hard to give and receive feedback, but giving feedback to your leaders when you feel like they're not creating psychological safety. And some leaders are very open to hearing that. Some may be a little earlier in their growth journey and may have a hard time hearing that. But I think that can be empowering to share. Like, when you say these things, this is how it makes me maybe feel, or maybe this is how this looks when I'm then going to do my work and it's less productive, or I don't feel like I can really optimally perform here because of the current circumstances or environment.
I love the, self-assessment piece that you start with because I do feel like if you're going in and sharing that feedback emotionally charged and it's like something just happened and it wasn't, I think there's a thoughtfulness that's needed as you step into that. And honestly, even, okay, how do I again, if you're reflecting and that's where you're at, like, I would encourage someone like, "Okay, what steps have you done to determine if it was something more? Are you staying up too late?" Like, maybe you have some things that aren't ideal that's contributing, and you're just showing up and your patience l your patience meter is lower than I'm just at least taking a bit of self-inventory first, so then when you go have that conversation, being able to say to your leader, "Hey, here's some things I've been doing, or here's some things I've explored, but yet it's really not seems like it's not moving the needle on the burnout. So here's some feedback. What else can be done? Like, it shows a bit of solution oriented posture that you've had as well, which I would hopefully hopefully a leader receives that. And if they don't, they shouldn't be in leadership, to be honest. But my opinion. But that I think that's a big step too, to help you discern and evaluate and validate, like, hey, I've put effort into this. It's not changing. What else can be done? If anything, if not, like you said, it may be time to look elsewhere.
Thank you so much for saying that because that is so important too, that like what may I be engaging in that's contributing or what may be some factors that have nothing to do with my organization. I think about um I sometimes talk with people about degrees of freedom, which a my internship supervisor taught me that when I was thinking about where do I wanna go to postdoc? She's like, "What are your degrees of freedom?" Like, "Is location important? Are you willing to commute? Is it salary? Is it work-life balance? Is it you wanna have a boss you like?" And you have to decide which of those you're willing to say, "This is most important, so I'm willing to give on this." And I think to your point, when we step back and we kind of evaluate, it's like, yes, things at work are really hard, but the 2-hour commute both directions is not helping or I'm working a schedule such that I can't go to my kids' baseball games in the evening, and maybe if I work with my manager to shift my schedule so I can be more active in their sports games and things like that, that would really have a difference. So yes, I think that it's important for us to empower people to say what might be within my scope of control and can I have those conversations with my leader around things that I have influence by bringing them up, but may not be something that I can actively change. So, yeah, I think that's thank you for sharing that. That is so spot on.
I've always believed that as a leader, it's my job to understand the people that I lead proactively, and I think there's so many decisions that I make that sets other people up for success, and I think if you're a caring leader, like, how can you not think about those things? Speak to the leader. So let's say that you can't sit there let's say you're someone on listening to this is managing 3 people. If you don't know whether they're burnt out or not, what's a practical step a leader can take to maybe get more data around that and do a check-in?
Yeah, ask. It's really that simple. I mean, there are surveys you can do. I think if you have a team of 3, it's a little hard to have anonymity, but that's oftentimes when I'm working with people, I say, start with some type of assessment. If you feel like you have a group where you can have those open conversations. Like I knew my staff was burnt out when I reached out to my mentor because they were telling me they were burnt out. I feel like there was enough of a level of psychological safety where people were like, "I am feeling toasty." Like, something's gotta give. So you can simply ask if you feel like you have those relationships. You can ask individually, you can ask as a group. Sometimes when it's a group, it feels a little safer to speak up. But ask, like, how do you feel you're doing? How do you feel like, your engagement is? What's it like to come to work for you? And what are the things that we're doing really well that we should keep doing or maybe continue to do more of? And what are the things that are really hard? So I really think it's about just asking because your staff are thinking about this and they're thinking about it often and they've probably thought of solutions. So they're going to be your experts in figuring it out. Or they may have ideas, and then you, as the leader, are the person who can advocate or make the changes. So, yeah, there's many ways you can approach it, but again, there's some really solid evidence-based, psychometrically strong measures of burnout. Um, you could just do a simple survey of like rate your level of engagement, rate your level of burnout, because you'll find that those 2 are, indirectly correlated. But I still think they're important to both ask. So,
Well, and quantifying that allows you to get curious and have conversations around it. I think about recently when I was hanging a TV, my wife I was hanging it and I had my wife step 20 feet back and I'm like, how's it look from your perspective? Right. And I think that's what you and I get to do when we work with people. And so I want you to kind of talk about coming alongside leaders or organizations. Sometimes I've found me walking in things that are very obvious to me have not been obvious to them because they're doing it day in and day out. And that's the work I love to get to do, offering fresh perspective and a different angle on things. And I know you as well. So kind of share a little bit about, your work, how people can get in contact with you, I'd love for you to plug that.
Sure, sure. I want to share a very brief story, which is a leader reached out to me and they were like, my team keeps reporting they're burnt out, which, what resources exist? And I said, well, actually, as a leader, you have so much opportunity to really help with their burnout. She was like, I'm their leader. I have nothing to do with burnout. And I was like, many growth opportunities here.
You just told on
So
yourself.
yeah, exactly. I was like, "Okay, let's start there." So my business is called Clinician Care Consulting. My website's cliniciancareconsulting.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn as Dr. Trisha Vinatieri. There's not a ton of Vinatieris in LinkedIn, so pretty easy to find.
Yep. Well, and I'll link all of that in the show notes as well, and definitely want to encourage the listeners to check out Dr. Vinatieri's work. And this conversation isn't going anywhere. If you're in a season where burnout isn't there, look to your left or right. There's probably someone nearby that's somewhere on that spectrum of it. And I think I just can't iterate enough that, for the leaders listening, this should be on your radar. Even when the business is doing well and thriving and growing, people are dynamic, people have challenges. Just do a check in. We should all know where the people that we lead are on that spectrum. And on the other side, hopefully this conversation that Dr. Vinatieri and I just had maybe prompts you to lead out and actually go and advocate for yourself and speak to your manager, because it's really important with our overall well-being. Burnout just it 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 doesn't stay with us at work; it goes home with us too.